Temple tax. Does your teacher not pay the temple tax? MT 17:24-27. Benjamin Franklin once wrote, "In this world nothing is certain but death and taxes." What was said in 1789 is still true today. Franklin, however, was not the first to address these issues. The Lord Jesus spoke of the certainty of death, Luke 12 verse 20, cf. Hebrews 9 verse 27, James 4 verses 14 and 15, as well as the certainty of taxes. He addressed the issue of the civil tax to the Roman government, Matt 22:15-22, Mark 12 verses 13-17, Luke 20 verses 20-26, as well as the religious tax, called the Shekel, paid to the temple in Jerusalem, Matt 17:24-27. Matthew, the tax collector, Matt 9:9-13, Mark 2 verses 13-17, Luke 5 verses 27-32, was employed by the Roman government to collect civil taxes. He is the only gospel writer to record the incident of the temple tax. This paper will explore several aspects of this saying. First, the saying will be put in its chronological setting. Second, the shekel will be examined in light of 1st century Jewish use for the temple tax. Third, fishhooks from the area of the Sea of Galilee will be analyzed. The kind of fish caught by Peter will be the next subject. Finally, the purpose of this saying will round out our search. The chronological setting. The temple tax incident took place in Capernaum soon after the transfiguration of the Lord Jesus on Mount Hermon. This event occurred in September of AD 29, right before Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. As the disciples walked back to Capernaum with the Lord Jesus, they engaged in a heated theological discussion among themselves, who is the greatest? Mark 9 verses 33 and 34. Before the Lord Jesus addressed that question, he demonstrated biblical greatness by paying the temple tax for himself and Peter. The shekel. Stater. During the Second Temple period, the temple institution collected a half shekel tax annually. This tax was designated for the daily and Shabbat, festival, sacrifices, their libations, the Omer, the 2 loaves of bread, the showbread, the communal sacrifices and other needs of the temple. Mishnah Shekalim 4:1-4. The rabbis linked the annual half shekel tax to the half shekel offering in the Pentateuch, Liver 1963, 184. This half shekel was mentioned in Exodus 30 verses 11-16. There seems to be a hint in the Bible that this tax became a permanent institution during the First Temple period. Ash, 2 Kings 12 verses 4 and 16 / 2 Chronicles 24 verses 4-13, Josiah, 2 Kings 22 verses 3-7 / 2 Chronicles 34 verses 8-14. The 1/3 shekel seems to be the Persian equivalent of the half shekel, Nehemiah 10 verses 33 and 34. Josephus, the 1st century AD Jewish historian, likewise understood the temple tax to be the same as the one decreed by Moses in the wilderness. Antiquities 3:193-196, LCL 4:409-411, 18:312-314, LCL 9:181. A warning was given on the first day of Adar, around the month of March, that the half shekel was due. Mishnah Shekalim 1:1. On the 15th of the month, the tables were set up in the provinces in order to collect the tax. One might assume, since Capernaum was a major Jewish center in Galilee, that one of the tables was in that city. By the 25th of Adar, the tables were set up in the temple. Mishnah Shekalim 1:3. If one chose to pay the tax in the temple, there were 13 shofar chests in the temple court which were used to collect different offerings. Mishnah Shekalim 6:5. One was inscribed new shekel dues, which was for that year. Another was inscribed old shekel dues, in order to collect the tax from the previous year if it had not been paid. Every Jewish male, 20 years old and up, voluntarily paid this tax once a year. He was to pay the tax either in his province or in the temple in Jerusalem. Mishnah Shekalim 1:3. The tax was always paid in the Tyrian coinage. Mishnah Bekaroth 8:7. Babylonian Talmud Kedushim 11b. These coins average 14.2 grams in weight and were minted with near pure silver. Leo Cadman describes an important discovery relating to these Tyrian shekels. He reports, in the spring of 1960, a hoard of about 4,500 ancient coins was discovered near Asphia on Mount Carmel. 3,400 of the coins were Tyrian shekels, about 1,000 half shekels, and 160 Roman denarii of Augustus. The shekels and half shekels are dated from 40 BC to 52-53 CE, the bulk of them from 20 to 53 CE. In the middle of the 1st century CE, there was only one purpose for which the exclusive use of Tyrian shekels was prescribed: the temple dues of half a shekel, which every male Jew of 20 years of age and above had to pay yearly to the temple in Jerusalem. The disproportion between the 3,400 shekels and the 1,000 half shekels is to be understood from the prescription of the Mishnah that each payment of a half shekel for one person was liable to an agio 1 of 4 to 8%, while the payment of a full shekel for two persons was exempt from the agio. The 160 denarii exactly represents the agio of 8% on the 1,000 half shekel found in the hoard, 1962:9-10. This hoard of coins was probably from a community of 30,000 Jews living in Phoenicia. The coins were most likely hidden on Mount Carmel when the caravans realized they could not make it to Jerusalem in May AD 67, because the Romans controlled the road from Megiddo to Jerusalem, Cadman 1962:11. Those in authority approached Peter in September of AD 29 to inquire if he and Jesus were going to pay their temple tax for that year. Apparently, Jesus did not pay the temple tax the previous spring because the only time he was in Capernaum before Passover was on Shabbat, John 6 verses 4 and 59. As an observant Jew, he would not have handled money on that day. The temple tax from Mesopotamia was due in September 4. Sukkos, Cadman 1962:11. Those who received the temple tax in Capernaum probably wanted to send what they collected since Passover along with the caravans going up to Jerusalem for Sukkot that year. The fish hook. Only a few fishhooks have been discovered in archaeological excavations in the region of the Sea of Galilee. Two were found in the traditional St. Peter's house in Capernaum, Corbo 1972:73-74, Figure 26, 1975:83, Photo 32. These fishhooks come from the destruction level of the 4th century structure and not the floor of the 1st century house. Most likely the hooks were placed there by pilgrims wanting to commemorate the event from the life of Peter, Taylor 1993, 278. Another fishhook, made of iron and measuring 2.5 inches long, was found at the site of Tel, identified by the excavators as Bethsaida, Kuhn and Erev 1991:102-105, Plate 113. The hook is most likely 1st century or earlier. However, in the first volume of the excavation report, there is no mention of this fishhook, Irv and Freund 1995:27-28, Figure 17 and 244-245. The fish. A tourist visiting Israel usually has an obligatory fish dinner at one of the fish restaurants around the Sea of Galilee. The fish usually served, head and all, is called the St. Peter's fish, known as the mushed, or common Arabic, for its long dorsal fin, fish. Sometimes a modern shekel coin is found in the mouth by someone in the tour group, usually one of the children. Of course, the waiter put it in the mouth. Early Christian tradition says that the mushed fish was the one caught with the hook by Peter, Sapir and Naaman 1967:7. One of its characteristics is that the mother fish carries the fertilized eggs in her mouth for 3 weeks until they hatch. For several days thereafter, the young fry swim near the mouth. Any sign of danger, the mother opens her mouth and the fry swim back inside the mouth for protection. Nunn 1989:6-7. This fish, the reasoning goes, has a big enough mouth to hold a shekel coin. The problem with this tradition is that the mushed fish is a plankton eater and caught with a net and not a hook and line. The most likely reason this fish got the name St. Peter's was because the local eating establishments, catering to the pilgrims to the Holy Land, found the name very marketable and good for tourism. Nunn 1989:46-48. Only two other fish are possible, the catfish and the barbel fish. The catfish, a scavenger, is possible because it feeds off the bottom of the lake, and thus could pick up the coin. It can also be seen along the rocky shore near ancient Capernaum. If it was the catfish, the reason Jesus instructed Peter to open the mouth of the fish, Matt 17:17, was because it was non-kosher, it has no scales, Leviticus 11 verses 9-12, and would have been thrown back by the fisherman without even looking inside, Matt 13:48. Most likely, however, the fish caught by Peter was the barbel fish. This fish, in the carp family, has barbs at the corner of its mouth, thus its name. It is a predator and bottom feeder and would go for a baited hook, Nunn 1989:86. It is usually caught along the shore during the autumn, Dalman 1935:134, the chronological setting of this event. The purpose of this incident. A lesson is most effectively taught if the teacher demonstrates the idea in a practical way. The Lord Jesus, the master teacher, demonstrated biblical greatness before he answered the question put to him by his disciples. In his omniscience, Jesus knew of the conversation between Peter and the individuals who received the temple tax. They asked if Jesus paid the tax or not. Peter answered in the affirmative. When Peter entered the house, Jesus put the question to Peter whether the sons of the kings or strangers paid taxes to kings of the earth. Peter correctly responded that the strangers did. Jesus reinforced this fact by stating that the sons were free. Not wanting to offend the tax collectors though, Jesus instructed Peter to cast a hook in the lake and take a shekel that would be found in the mouth of the fish and pay the temple tax for him and Peter. Why did he do this? Jesus was demonstrating humility and servanthood, the true characteristic of biblical greatness, to Peter and his fellow disciples, Mark 10 verses 42-45. Jesus, following up on Peter's great confession made at Caesarea Philippi, Matt 16:15-17, was God manifest in human flesh, 1 Timothy 3 verse 16 NKJV. He did not have to pay the temple tax because in the analogy that he made to Peter, he was the king's son. The temple was his father's house and he was greater than that temple, Matt 12:6, Matt 21:12-13, Mark 11 verse 17, yet he voluntarily, and in humility, paid the tax. What a lesson in humility! Jesus demonstrated another principle of humility when he paid for Peter as well. He did not have to do this either, but he did. I suspect, but cannot prove, that Jesus singled out Peter because he was full of pride after having seen the transfiguration. I wonder if Peter was not the one who first raised the question, who is the greatest? It is quite possible that this is the incident that the Apostle Paul had in mind when he described the humble mind of Christ when he wrote, "In lowliness of mind let each esteem others better than himself." Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others, Phil 3:3-4. Jesus exemplified humility when he paid Peter's tax as well. These words were penned in the context of the Lord Jesus humbling himself by his death on the cross of Calvary, Phil 2:1-11. This event records the first time the disciples asked the question, who is the greatest, but it was not the last. On the way to Jerusalem for Passover in AD 30, they raised the question in Jericho, Matt 20:20-28, Mark 10 verses 35-45. Later, just before Passover, Jesus addressed the scribes and Pharisees on this issue, Matt 23:11-12. The disciples, however, still did not understand the answer to the question. At the Last Supper, they were still arguing the question, Luke 22 verses 24-30. Jesus again gave a practical demonstration of humility by washing the feet of his disciples, John 13 verses 1-20. These examples of humility finally broke through to Peter. Years later, as he reflected on them, he admonished his fellow elders to shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers. Not being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock, 1 Peter 5 verses 2-3. Peter finally learned the lesson, God gives grace to the humble, but he will exalt the humble in due time, 1 Peter 5 verses 5 and 6, cf. Proverbs 3 verse 34, 1533. Bibliography. Arov, Rami, and Freund, Richard, eds.